الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the subject of al-fiqh, and we finished the chapter of al-wasiyya. And as we know that this book is very summarized. There's many chapters of fiqh that are not included in the book, but the reason why we chose this book as an entry level because it had a translation. So to go through the chapters of fiqh, and then the next stage, inshallah ta'ala, to do it only in Arabic, inshallah. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy, inshallah. But also after we finish, because there's only not much left, once we're done with the book, inshallah ta'ala, we'll go back to the mu'amalat, to the subject of transactions from another book that is almost the same title. But I'm not sure if there's a translation in English or not. Maybe someone can search for it. It's called Al-Fiqh al-Muyassar. This one, رسالة في الفقه الميسر. And الفقه الميسر is, mashallah, is very precise, it's the same way, but it's from a group of ulama, contemporary scholars that they made this book. And it's has the tab'a of Malik Fahd. So it's covers more chapters, almost all chapters of fiqh, inshallah. So we'll go back and cover all the different contracts and things like this and transactions. And the things that we didn't mention, for example, the mawarith, the laws of inheritance, we'll go through that, inshallah. So hopefully we'll cover every chapter in the books of fiqh in general. And then after that, we can, inshallah, go through a matn of fiqh to go through it word by word, inshallah, in Arabic, inshallah. So we have, inshallah, a few months to be strong in the Arabic language, inshallah. طيب, here the third part of the book is الأحوال الأسرية, family matters. Family matters and النكاح وأحكامه وشروطه. النكاح or marriage and its أحكام, its rulings and its conditions. And the word النكاح, he says حكمة مشروعية النكاح. النكاح is a word that refers to the marriage contract, and it refers also to the relations between the husband and the wife. So it has both meanings. And this is something that the ulama talk about with the word an-nikah. That it's what's the definition of it shar'an is the contract. وحقيقته, and the reality of it also is used in the meaning of the intimate relationship between the husband and the wife. So as he says here, first, حكمة مشروعية النكاح. Before he defines the word النكاح لغة وشرعا, linguistically and religiously, as always, he talks first about the حكمة or the wisdom behind the مشروعية. المشروعية from sharia, from مشروع, meaning that this is part of the deen. That why this is legislated, why this is part of the deen, or the حكمة, some of the wisdom. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that revealed these rulings to the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran and the Sunnah. It says, he says, النكاح من سنن الإسلام. When I'm reading in the Arabic, and if you have the English translation, so that also we can pick up some of the words, at least the terminologies and things like this. So النكاح من سنن الإسلام, from the ways of الإسلام التي رغب فيها الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. رغب, he encouraged us from الترغيب, رغبة رهبة ورغبة, رغبة ورهبة, to have the رغبة, to have the zeal. So the Prophet ﷺ encouraged the Ummah to get married. And this is a subject by itself that requires for us to give it more and more attention. Because the sad reality of many of the Muslims today, they followed the ways of others when it comes to the subject of marriage. That's why you find people, staying a long period of time of their life and they're not married. When it's not the case when it comes to be as Muslims, as we would see from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and as Umar radiallahu anhu used to, if he sees a man that is not married, and he has the means to get married, because of course it's conditioned with having the ability to get married, but we exaggerate now so much that the person has to, with these means that some people they put together for someone to get married, he has to retire before he can get married. So he used to accuse the person that has the ability to get married and not to get married with either al-fujur or al-ajz. Either that he's fajr, he's a sinner. How can someone stays without marriage? So either he's committing sins left and right, or he has inabilities. So what else if he has the means to get married? So the hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, يا معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج فإنه أغض للبصر وأحصن للفرج ومن لم يستطع فعليه بالصوم فإنه له وجاء رواه الجماعة. And this beautiful hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he gives only two options. So addressing first الشباب, يا معشر الشباب, الشباب the men, or because the woman, of course, her wali also, he's in charge to make sure that she gets married. So يا معشر الشباب, and الشباب starts from when? From the age of puberty all the way to 40. And of course, those who, because this is the norm, assuming that once you reach that age, of course, you're already married. So it's not exclusive to the shabab, it's to everyone. But because this age group is the one that needs to be encouraged to get married as soon as they can, with other conditions, of course. Nobody would say, well, now I reached the age of puberty, I want to get married. Sure, but do you fit? Even mentally, nowadays, the way that we upbring our children, a person might be an adult in the Shara' and according to the deen of Allah, but he's still acting like a child. He cannot even take responsibilities for his own self. So anyway, so he says, we're talking about fiqh here, so we don't want to talk about other things. So يا معشر الشباب من استطاع, whoever has the ability, الاستطاعة is the ability that a person has according to his capacity. الباء فليتزوج, and الباء is both financial and physical. فليتزوج, and whatever also means when it comes to the capacity of getting married. فليتزوج, so this is an order. Then let him get married. فإنه أغض للبصر وأحصن للفرج. أغض للبصر, غض البصر is to lower the gaze. أغض, that means it's more than to help the person to make, or to help him to lower the gaze. وأحصن الفرج, and it's more in protection of one's private part, meaning to be chaste and to be away from what is haram. And as it will come, the ahkamul khamsa applies. So for some people, when do the ulama in the books of fiqh, they say that al-zawaj wajib, marriage is obligatory upon a person if he fears for himself the sins. Fears. Not that he's already in sin. If he fears for himself sins, then it's obligatory upon him. So فليتزوج. And of course, for that, he has to have the means, and you have to find someone to accept him for marriage. So فإنه أغض للبصر وأحسن الفرج. ومن لم يستطع, if he's not able to, because he has the lack of whatever the abilities, or he does not even find someone that would accept him with whatever state that he's in. So what is the solution? If it's an obligatory thing upon him, and because he fears for himself to fall into the sin, فعليه بالصوم فإنه له وجاء. Then let him fast. That means every day. And this is how this will be wija. Al-wija is when you cut off something. So this is cut off the desire that would lead him to commit sins, but it's not going to be forever till he finds a spouse. And a sawm does not harm the person. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us, but how many of our young shabab, they're fasting every day? Let alone fasting even to start with, fasting once a month. So where is then what is happening? That means they don't fear sins for them. This is again, it shows that we have a big problem, and that's why the hadith, it says like this: if people talk about all kinds of ways to avoid haram and things like this, it is as the hadith says. It's a difficult one, yes. And if communities, if societies, if the ummah see that how difficult it is, then the marriage becomes easy. But when it's easy, since it's okay, nobody's paying attention to these types of things, then it becomes difficult. And the sins affects also, has its bad effect on ourselves and on the societies and so on. But see how the serious matter is. The Prophet ﷺ did not give anything easy for the person if he's not able to get married. فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ. Then let him get married. And فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ is not Mondays and Thursdays, it's not 1 day a month, it's not 3 days a month. That means he's fasting, so that he would protect himself from the haram if he fears for himself again that he would fall into the haram. So this is a separate subject, not necessarily discussed in the subject of al-fiqh. من حكمة الزواج, from the wisdom behind الزواج. And by the way, the zawaj or marriage is not just for the physical fulfillment of the necessities of one's life, which is the desires and things like this. And that's also mentioned in the books of fiqh. For someone, for example, doesn't have even the desire, it's still recommended for him to get married with the condition that the other side will be informed. And they would agree to this. Why? Because this is always the norm of a Muslim. If someone is alive, he should be married. This is how things are. And to the best of one's ability, again, unless a person is not able to, this is لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. There is no harm for the person if he's not married, as long as he wants to get married and he's taking the means to get married and things of that nature. So number one, الزواج بيئة صالحة. الزواج is a righteous environment تؤدي إلى ترابط الأسرة. The family becomes strong with one another. This is how, two families, they did not know each other, then they become in relationship with one another, and the husband and the wife and so on, وتبادل المحبة, and the love that comes as a result of this, وإعفاف النفس, to have the iffa or chastising oneself and protecting oneself from the haram. All these types of great benefits for the sake of Allah, for the hereafter, to protect ourselves from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He forbids something, He makes the ease, if people follow the deen of Allah, the ease to avoid it. So, and this is in all things that are haram. And one of which is if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even forbade, not forbidding gazing, from men and women, this is even forbidden. So that means the marriage has to be made easy. But when we make it difficult for ourselves, that means we have other problems. We made sins easy for us. So as a punishment, then marriage becomes difficult. But not necessarily to the individual. To the individual, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again help everyone to fulfill the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, الزواج خير وسيلة لإنجاب الأولاد. It's one of the best means to have children, offsprings, وتكثير النسل مع المحافظة على الأنساب, which is one of the objectives or one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ called the ummah to increase and to have lots of offsprings, to be proud of them in the Day of Judgment. And protecting the lineage, otherwise, as you see, people do not know who's the father and who's this and who's that. So the zawaj, marriage, is the proper way. الزواج أحسن وسيلة لإرواء الغريزة الجنسية قضاء الوطر مع السلامة من الأمراض. The best way to fulfill the desires, the physical desires, while being safe from diseases and all these types of bad things. Also في الزواج إشباع لغريزة الأبوة والأمومة التي تنمو بوجود الأطفال. We as human beings, we have this in our innate that a person wants to have children, whether it's a father or for men and for women. So this is zawaj, fulfill this desire. By the way, this is if someone is not married or someone is not able to get married or whatever, is not things to make the person sad or miserable. Everything is by the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no one says that without marriage, then life becomes a disaster. No, for some people, this might be even better for them. So each person is different, right? And whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed upon the person is what is best. Yeah, He take the means, they take the means, and if it's not happening while they're sincere and taking the means, then whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for them is what is best. But not to make the zawaj or the marriage as a goal, and then it brings all kinds of bad things. For example, the conditions of both spouses, or to get married to anyone, and then the religion is not established. What's the purpose of marriage? Is to establish the deen. So if the marriage is corrupting one's religion, then it's better without marriage, right? So this is a mean and not a goal in itself. Also, number 5 of الزواج سكن. Zawaj has sakan, and this is mentioned in the Quran. Sukun is this calmness, this tranquility, and that's why the shaitan works on this specifically, so that he makes the relationship between the spouses doesn't have the sukun. And if when someone is righteous, they would make sure that they would take the means. وطمأنينة واحتشام, covering and protection and chastisement and all these types of things. Okay, so this is usually not mentioned in the books of fiqh. The second thing is تعريف النكاح. The definition of النكاح لغة, linguistically, الوطء. So the word النكاح linguistically refers to the actual relations between man and a woman. والجمع بين الشيئين. Also the nikah is used for when two things are brought together. وقد يطلق على العقد, and also the عقد, the marriage contract is called nikah, and anything that is two things get together. Like even they would say it, تناكحت الأشجار. The trees are, mixed together. So this is how the word even is used. So this is how it comes from linguistically. تقول نكح فلانة إذا عزم على أن يتزوجها وعقد عليها. It can be used with the عقد, with the contract, so and so نكح فلان, that means he wants to get married to her, or he made the عقد, the contract. And if a person says نكح امرأته, if a person uses the same word when it comes to his own wife, that means the relations done, the intimate relationship. So this is linguistic. النكاح شرعا, شرعا, like the salah, what's the definition of it, شرعا, the zakah, and so on. Every terminology has a definition to it linguistically and religiously. شرعا عقد, so it's a عقد, it's a contract. عقد يعتبر فيه لفظ إنكاح أو تزويج في الجملة. عقد, that means there's two parties, there's a contract between two. فيه لفظ, in it is the word of إنكاح, إنكاح like the nikah, or تزويج. إنكاح, that means someone is getting married to someone, or تزويج, meaning for both to be married. في الجملة, in general. So in general meaning that these words have to be mentioned, or what means that in whatever culture, whatever language even. And that's why as it will come. Can people get married with al-ijab wal-qabul in English, for example, and the marriage will be valid? Yes. But it has to be clear words that this is marriage. And of course, to avoid any confusion or things like this, we usually would, if people do not speak the Arabic language, then both needs to be said. Because it's easy to say it in Arabic and to say it in English, and to avoid any confusion. But it has to be clear. أو تزويج في الجملة. والمعقود عليه منفعة الاستمتاع أو الازدواج أو المشاركة. المعقود عليه, what is the contract between a man and a woman is on what? To buy and sell? When it comes to marriage, no. It's منفعة الاستمتاع, the benefit of enjoying one another, أو الازدواج, for them to be together. They were haram with one another before the marriage, and then they're halal, and then rights to be observed. Not just the intimate relationship, but all kinds of things, financial responsibilities and rights to be observed, and السمع والطاعة, listening and obedience, and kindness, and all kinds of commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be observed between the spouses, and then children and raising and so on. أو المشاركة, this musharaka or this partnership in accordance with the deen of Allah. So النكاح شرعا عقد, so it's a عقد, it's a contract. يعتبر فيه لفظ إنكاح أو تزويج في الجملة. So the word of الإنكاح or التزويج is mentioned in this contract. So to make it clear that it's not any other form of a transaction or a عقد or contract or covenant. حكم النكاح. So what we need to remember for the definition, that it's عقد, and the lafz or the word of إنكاح or تزويج have to be there. Because a man and a woman, strangers from one another, you can have a contract of buying an apartment, and she's purchasing it. It's عقد. But الزواج, that has to be the word with الزواج or النكاح or something that very clearly states this. حكم النكاح. What is the حكم of النكاح? يسن لذي شهوة لا يخاف الزنا ويجب على من يخافه ويباح لمن لا شهوة له كالعنين والكبير ويحرم بدار الحرب لغير ضرب. He says يسن for some, which is يسن means in the books of fiqh recommended, not obligatory. ويجب, and which is obligatory to some. ويباح, permissible to some. ويحرم, it's haram to some. He did mention the makruh, but also the makruh is mentioned, but not here. يسن, this is what is mentioned first, because this is the general ruling of الزواج. الزواج in Islam is sunnah, is the sunnah of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. So he says here, then what is specific to the individual is that yusannu, meaning recommended. It's not obligatory. And the word recommended is weak. Because when you say yusannu, when you say it's the sunnah, that means what? That means do it. Right? It doesn't mean it's recommended for you. What is recommended? That's why the al-fadh al-shar'iyya, the religious words, it needs to be kept that way. Because when you say sunnah, sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This is the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Whoever stays away from my sunnah is not one of me. He does not belong to me. So the zawaj is from the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So that's why you sannu, that means do it. If you have the means, then you do it. But here, meaning that it's not haram. Okay, it's not obligatory, because if it's obligatory, then this is another level. For who? لِذِي شَهْوَةٍ لَا يَخَافُ الزِّنَا. Someone that has shahwa, has the desire, but he does not fear for himself az-zina or adultery or anything that leads to it, which is haram basically. Then it's not obligatory upon that person, because he's not committing sins. He does not fear for himself that he would commit a sin. And this is in theory like this. وَيَجِبُ, when is the zawaj is wajib, is obligatory, عَلَى مَنْ يَخَافُهُ, the one that fears for himself that he would fall into the zina or what's haram, what leads to it. Right? وَيَجِبُ, so it becomes obligation. وَيُبَاحُ, and it's recommended. Al-mubah is what's in between the wajib and the muharram. You have the wajib, the recommended, or the sunnah, or the mustahab, and then the mubah, and then you makruh, and then the haram. So al-mubah is in the middle, which is permissible either way. لمن لا شهوة له كالعنين والكبير. It's permissible for the one that has no desire. كالعنين, al-عنين is the one that doesn't have the means, and the one that is very old in age. But here, this is the general ruling. But for some individuals, someone that doesn't have the desire whatsoever, that means he will harm the other, the spouse, because this is one of the rights of marriage. So someone like this, or someone old in age, to them, if the other side would be like them, for example, or they would agree without any conditions that are not normal, then it's still recommended. So if someone is 90 years old, right, and he doesn't have a wife, is it recommended for him to get married? Yes, if the other side will agree. But to die as married is better than to die then when you're not married, especially for men. So this is, and Abdullah ibn Saudi said something in that meaning, that if there's only one day in his life and he has the means to get married, he would get married. And it's not about just fulfillment, because he said, because the fear of the fitna, and the fitna doesn't have to be the physical matters only, but this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the human beings, even without getting into the details, but this is for men even is more than for women, even though everyone is upon the same level. So here, يجب على من يخاف ويباح لمن لا شهوة له ويحرم, when the marriage is haram, they mention this بدار الحرب. دار الحرب, a person is in a place which is the land of war. The land of war of the enemies, meaning that what is the definition of دار الحرب? A land that a person is in, if they find out that he's a Muslim, they will get rid of him. They will kill him. So people would hide their religion till they flee, right? And that's why these types of ruling that comes as a result of that, it's haram to travel with a mushaf fi dar al-harb. If someone is traveling and he has a mushaf, and he goes to a place where if they see the mushaf, they would tear it and they would burn it and they would, things like this, then it's haram to travel to that place with a mushaf, if a person has to travel. And that's also bring the subject when people say it's halal to deal with riba in the West because it's darul harb. They better not to say this, because they'll get themselves into big trouble. is just a way to deceive themselves. Dar al-Harb, that means if people, how many masahif we have? You know, you walk in the streets with your beard, with you make salah, there's masajid. This is not Dar al-Harb. Dar al-Harb is it waged the war against anything that is related to the deen of Islam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So the ulama, when they say that a person is in Dar al-Harb, it happened to be there, regardless of what's the ruling for him, why is he doing in a place like this? They say it's haram as a general ruling. Why? Because the offsprings, for example, they're not going to be under his authority. You know, he's going to lose them. And that means also he have to hide his identity and things of that nature. لغير ضرورة, unless it's a necessity and he needs to save himself from what is haram. Or anything that would deal with the marriage will cause haram, with whatever that can mean. Or marrying someone that is not permissible to marry. So these are basically the 5 ahkam applies to matters of marriage. This is حكم النكاح, the general ruling of it, and then the specifics for each case. صيغه. صيغة is the content of any contract, has a content. And according to the content of the contract, then we define the contract. So it's not by what people give it as a title. What's the content of it? And the content of it would, so when people, for example, take a riba loan and they tell them this is partnership. MashaAllah, you called it partnership, but let me see the contract and all of the details of it. When you see the content, you say this is not partnership. This is aqd ribawi. This is riba contract. Or this is loan, or this is something else. So صيغه, what's the content of it? ينعقد النكاح بكل لفظ يدل عليه. ينعقد, that means النكاح is established, becomes binding, becomes a contract with every word that is evident to it. So it doesn't have to be written. It's just with the words of, as it's going to be mentioned, with arkanun nikah. Any lafz يدل عليه, any word that would give an evidence to it. وبأي لغة, and with any language, as long as it means marriage. فيقول زوجت أو نكحت. This is in Arabic. I get married to, or نكحت. أو يقول قبلت هذا النكاح. The إجابة والقبول, as it will come, offering an acceptance. I accept this nikah. I accept this marriage. أو تزوجتها, or I married her. أو تزوجت أو رضيت, or I'm pleased to marry. All of these types of things. ويستحب أن يكون باللغة العربية. Of course, it's recommended to be in the Arabic language. ومن لم يعرفها أدى الإجابة أو القبول بلغته. And the one that doesn't know the Arabic, he should say it with his language. So the norm is that people would do, they would use both. But when you say Arabic and they don't understand what they're doing, you know, there's what's the contract here. So the meaning of it has to be clear. And al-ijab is from al-wujub. That means you make it as an obligation, which is, as they call it, the offer. The offer meaning that you're making it as an obligation, and then al-qabul is to accept. We'll take the arkan of al-nikah, and then we'll stop here, inshallah. There is arkan and there is shurut. There is pillars and there are conditions of marriage. And as we will see the differences, inshallah ta'ala, even though some of the ulama, they would add certain things, but most of it is added that does not have a great effect on what is meant by the marriage in general, as we would see, inshallah. But al-rukn, as we talked about it in salah and other matters of fiqh, is basically related to the most important thing, and it's the act itself, something within the act itself. Different than a-shurut. A-shurut conditions, that means it's not part of the act itself, but it has to be done. So at the end result, both have to be fulfilled. Like takbiratul ihram is rukn or shart of the salah. Takbiratul ihram, rukn, because it's part of the salah and it's a rukn. Without it, there's no salah. Al-wudu, rukn or shart? A shart. Shart. Al-wudu is a condition, not a rukn, because it's not from the salah. But can someone make salah without wudu? No. So the end result is the same, but it's a way to understand the difference between a shart or rukn. A shart, ليس من ماهية الشيء, and other differences, but the main thing is it's not part of it, but it's still a condition. Without it, you cannot fulfill that act. And the pillars, it's the act itself. So what are the arkan az-zawaj? He says, له ركنان. There are two rukn. Al-ijab wal-qabul. Very easy to remember. Al-ijab wal-qabul. These are pillars of the marriage because this is what the contract is about. That's within the marriage itself that establishes the marriage. Al-ijab, which comes from wajib, this is the offer. Do they translate it as the offer or how is it? The offer. No. وهو اللفظ الصادر من الولي. اللفظ is the words that are uttered from الصادر, comes out from الولي, from the guardian, أو من يقوم مقامه, or the one that in his position, someone that is acting on his behalf and proxy instead of the wali, because he's not there, he's traveling or whatever. أو من يقوم مقامه, or he's not present, then it goes to the next in line of the awliya. We'll talk about the different who has the right. بلفظ إنكاح, with the word of إنكاح أو تزويج. ممن يحسن العربية. Someone knows the Arabic language, he has to say either إنكاح أو تزويج. أنكحتك, زوجتك, and then he would say ابنتي, موكلتي, whatever. If he knows the Arabic language. لأنهما اللفظان الوارد بهما القرآن, because these are the two words that mentioned in the Quran. قال تعالى فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من نساء. فانكحوا, get married, ما طاب لكم من نساء, what you desire from the women. So this is, and also الزواج is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, for those who know the language. And it doesn't have to be your mother tongue. So you know the word nikah and you know the word zawaj as a Muslim. So that means use it in the aqd, use it in the contract, even if your language is different. But you know these words, so that means you have to use it. This is al-ijab. So the ijab is the offer, and who's the one that is offering? Who's the one? And again, it's not the word offer, it's the word that comes from the wali or the one that acts on his behalf. And the meaning the wali of the woman. So he would say that. And he's not offering in the sense that he's not saying, would you like to marry my daughter? He doesn't say it. He's not offering. And then the person, let me think about it. No, they already decided and the matter is done and they're just doing the contract. So it's a way actually to establish a contract in the most powerful way. If it's done that way. And that's why it has to start from the wali of the woman, that he would say this. It's different than, for example, if it was the other way around, he would say, I want to, or give me your daughter for marriage, and he would say, accept. No, it's stronger that it's the other way around. So the wali would say this, and it has to be, the ijab has to come before the qabul. The ijab has to be done first before the qabul. So this is from the wali, أو من يقوم مقامه. القبول هو اللفظ الصادر من الزوج. So al-ijab lafz, it's a word that comes from the wali, and al-qabul هو اللفظ الصادر من الزوج, the word that comes from the husband. الزوج is the man basically. Get it. No. Sorry? Oh, the mahr is not in the pillars. This is in the conditions. But it's without it, yes. But the marriage has to be with mahr. But with the pillars, as far as the classification only, so the ijab is from the wali, and the qabul is a lafdhu sadiri min az-zawj, is the word that comes from az-zawj, which is the man, أو من يقوم مقامه. Can be someone acting on his behalf. Can someone, so for example, you have the two. The wali is not there, so he appoints someone. And the one that wants to get married, the man, he's not there and he appoints someone else. That's fine. So both parties are not the ones that are getting married, but each one is acting on behalf of the other. That's fine. أو من يقوم مقامه. And the words will be بلفظ قبلت. This is al-qabul. He would say قبلت, I accept. أو رضيت هذا النكاح, or I'm pleased with this nikah. أو قبلت فقط, or just قبلت. And when we add على كتاب الله وعلى سنة رسول, it doesn't have to be there. Just the fact that if someone says زوجتك, and then he has to mention, as the conditions will come, who exactly that he's getting married to, and then you say قبلت, that's the end of it. With the other conditions, with the shuhud, the witnesses, and the wali, and the shahada, and the mahr, and all these types of things. But it's Again, we're talking about the pillars here. The pillars meaning what constitutes the contract. القبول, الإيجاب والقبول. He says ويكون الإيجاب سابقا للقبول إلا بقرينة. الإيجاب has to come before القبول. The إيجاب comes first before the قبول. إلا بقرينة, unless there is a way to make it clear that this was before the other. Then after that he talks about the conditions of a nikah. Some of the ulama, they mention from the pillars, which is they say the husband and the wife, but others they say who's going to get married anyway. So why this is added to the pillars when it's already obvious that this is how marriage is. But we'll stop here, even though there might be questions when it comes to the conditions, but we didn't talk about the conditions yet, and the mahr and all of these types of things. We'll do that inshallah ta'ala next time because of the time. Inshallah. And before you have any questions, we'll take the next hadith. Hadith number in Sahih al-Bukhari, in the last chapter of Sahih al-Bukhari, Kitab al-Tawheed, which is 173. We took 172 last week. So 173, hadith number 173. We'll read the hadith inshallah. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يقبض الله الأرض يوم القيامة ويطوي السماء بيمينه ثم يقول أنا الملك أين ملوك الأرض. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يقبض الله الأرض يوم القيامة ويطوي السماء بيمينه ثم يقول أنا الملك أين ملوك الأرض. This hadith is in Kitab al-Tawheed in Sahih al-Imam al-Bukhari. And as we know that Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, when he put these hadith in Kitab al-Tawheed, in the chapter of the Tawheed, mainly is about the hadith that talks about the names and attributes of Allah. To state clearly the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah when it comes to the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they believe in it, all what is mentioned in the Quran and mentioned in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, without tashbih, without drawing any similarities, without ta'til, without denying it, without tahrif, without altering the meaning of it. And we know the ayah in the Quran clearly that states لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Nothing is the like of Allah, and He's the all-hearer, the all-seer. And for this, the ayah is a foundation to the belief in the names and attributes of Allah, because it starts with denying anything that resembles or gives similarities in such a ijmal, in general terms. This is the aqidah. Anything that is less than perfect is not to be attributed to Allah. We don't attribute except what's in the wahy, in the Quran and the Sunnah. It says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Nothing is the like of Him. But this in general. So, and then after that, it's stated in specific, the ithbat, the confirming the names and attributes of Allah is mentioned in specific. So He is subhanahu wa ta'ala as-Sami' and He is al-Basir subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is also the way of believing in all of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something about His names or attributes or like that, we believe in it and we deny anything that would make the person have similarities but still we confirm what it means. So if the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says as-Sami', He's the all-hearer. You hear, I hear, this person here. But لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Nothing is the like of Allah. Very obvious, very clear, very simple. Fits the nature of the human beings. Right? No resemblance, not even thinking. We don't know how, and that's it. Same thing with al-Basir. That's what the ayah basically stating. So the same rule applies in all of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No exceptions. Just apply it, and then the person will be happy by following the way the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The misery that happened to the Ummah as a result of the philosophy and translation of philosophy books and getting into these types of things, that they start talking about things without any knowledge. So why we start this by saying that? Because of this is the hadith is basically mentioned in there, and you can simply say to someone, when deny. So first the hadith says, يقبض الله الأرض. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يقبض الأرض. That means He grabbed the earth يوم القيامة, in the day of al-Qiyamah, ويطوي السماء بيمينه, and roll up the heavens in His right hand subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثم يقول, then He says, أنا الملك أين ملوك الأرض. I am the king, where are the kings of the earth? So the hadith talks about attributes of Allah. And of course, once the belief it's taken care of, and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum did not ask, how is this, why is that, does it mean the power, or it means they understood exactly what is being said, and to benefit from the hadith instead of being distracted, but to benefit from what the hadith means. But the aqidah is very important, because those who claim that the hadith means the power of Allah, and al-yad, or they deny the yad, or the hands, and they say it refers to the power of Allah. This is false belief, of course, and it's a very obvious one, and it's not even according to the language as they claim. And the Arab, they would never, if they, in some contexts, they would use the yad or the hand for power. They never used it when it comes into the muthanna to refer to power. The yad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu, sometimes mufrad, singular, sometimes plural, sometimes muthanna. Muthanna means in the dual tense. لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيْ, with my two hands. It's mentioned like this. There is no place whatsoever in language that the Arab would say in the muthanna, in the dual tense, referring to the power. It doesn't exist. So just leave it the way it is, but knowing the meaning of it. Not to say Allah knows what does it mean. No, it means as it's mentioned, but no similarities, no resemblance whatsoever, and a person's mind should not go further than this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the most powerful subhanahu wa ta'ala. يقبض الله الأرض يوم القيامة ويطوي السماء بيمينه. And other hadith that talks about two hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وكلتا يداه يمين, as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said both hands are right, because the left gives some negative meanings to it, and there's no negativity. Some of the hadith mentions as-shimal, or left, but there's no, again, deficiency or weakness or any resemblance or similarities whatsoever. Any similarities to the human beings, it's something to be negated and to be turned away from. So this is what's going to happen to the earth and the heavens in the day of al-Qiyamah. ثم يقول, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, أنا الملك, I am the king. أين ملوك الأرض, where are the kings of the earth? Where they're all creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're all dead, and they have no power even to help themselves. So this is the hadith, so it's easy inshallah ta'ala to remember. يقبض الله الأرض يوم القيامة ويطوي السماء بيمينه ثم يقول أنا الملك أين ملوك الأرض. Is it clear إن شاء الله؟ بارك الله فيكم، وصلى الله وسلم على محمد وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك، أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك.